Today I'll be refuting the claim that animal experimentation is unnecessary. My advocate's secondary claims are that animal testing is not efficient in 75% of its cases. Secondly, animal testing is unethical. And thirdly, that scientists use dead test animals very liberally. My response to this claim is that this is more of a claim of value than fact, and experimentation is necessary for human safety. In response to the first secondary claim that animal testing is not efficient in 75% of its cases, the advocate stated this information was from the Washington Post, which we could assume was a reliable source, but I doubt the Washington Post would make such a bold claim without some sort of statistical backing from a reputable source. Later on in the advocate's speech, they stated that 92% of drugs fail in clinical trials. This is confusing with the other data cited before, also from the Washington Post. If 92% of the drugs fail, then shouldn't 92% of the cases be inefficient? And it was also unclear as to whether these percentages were for cosmetic or medical use or both. The advocate later on went to talk about the lethal dose 50 experiment, which leads to the second secondary claim that animal testing is unethical. The lethal dose 50 experiment basically establishes the overdose levels for a drug, which is vital information for public use. And secondly, and it's also just one test out of many tests that drugs need to go through to be certified and sold to the public. Secondly, also about the second secondary fact is that this is a claim of value. Animal testing is unethical is not a claim of fact, but of value, which, as stated, the advocate said in their speech, there is a reason we are not testing these experiments on humans. We're afraid of endangering a life. The same should go for animals. If we don't test drugs on animals and we only limit the research and testing to be done on humans, this could lead to unjust and socially unjust consequences that I would argue are also inhumane and unethical as well. If we only used humans to test on, that means that we would be basically testing on paid volunteers, because you can't mandate that people become test guinea pigs for test drugs. And this would be limited to basically the underclasses or people that would be willing to put themselves through clinical trials that are they don't know about. And according to the statistics, that I doubt most people would sign up for tests that are 75% efficient. And so that would be very highly unethical and inhumane as well. Thirdly, my advocate's third secondary claim was that scientists use dead test animals very liberally. They did not talk about any more specifics of this statement. They just introduced it, but did not offer any data or examples of why or what the scientists do after the animals have died. And lastly, my advocate ended with a plan of action, which is a policy claim, which kind of moved the speech from introduced with the claim of fact and then moved to a claim of value and then ending with a claim of policy, which kind of made the speech a little confusing and hard to follow. And this is why the advocate's claim is more of a claim of value and experimentation is necessary for human safety.
All right, Josh, organizationally things are pretty clear. You come up with a couple of counterclaims that you're going to be using as kind of general responses on all of the secondary points. Some of them have to do with the value issue, and some of them have to do with the safety issue. The value issue you keep coming back to, and I think I'm going to give you a little bit of leeway on that since the advocate's dealing with value issues. I think that you should be able to respond in kind. But none of your arguments has any development of evidence or grounds for the value arguments. You just kind of give a hypothetical contrary position without demonstrating that it's likely or probable, and explaining what those issues would be, using some authority to suggest that there is a violation of a principle there. I think that that is a little bit underdeveloped as a consequence. Your challenge on the first point seems to be largely about the inconsistency in the statistics of the information. I'm not sure that that is in fact a big problem. The fact that 75% of the animal tests fail and 92% of the medications fail doesn't mean that there isn't a reason for further failure after it gets past the animal stages. I think what you need to point out is that the 25% that are successful with the animal research gives us greater data, and we need that greater data. And if 92% ultimately fail, we need to have a larger number of things that we're testing on so that the 8% that succeed ultimately it's going to be a bigger number, if that's the way to maybe present that. I do think that you have a good point here about whether or not it's cosmetic or medical research that's being talked about, but that would be a more important point if you could show, for instance, that the cosmetic research is largely unimportant, or, for example, that it's been done away with, in which case we're not really dealing with a current issue. We're talking about the past. On medical issues, I think you need to advance an argument that says that this kind of research does produce some medical results, and you don't really push that point. The LD50 argument you do, this is where you present your value argument. I thought that was a reasonable value claim that you've got there. Like I said, I think it would have been stronger with some evidence. You do have this idea about the paid volunteers, and I think that that's an interesting idea. Of course, I'm not sure how that's different from now, because once they do human testing, isn't that what they use anyway? So why is it dramatically different, except that they're taking a greater chance because they're dealing with a medication that hasn't been tested on anything before them? At the end, when you point out that it's a policy claim, I thought, well, okay, that's a pretty legitimate issue to make. So how about some policy arguments about this? What the negative consequences would be if we abolish this, whether or not it's possible to do so, whether or not there are economic consequences or long-term health consequences here. And I thought maybe even some value arguments to go along with it about animals. Now, everybody loves an animal, but you know what? That doesn't mean that we don't utilize animals. He says, especially on that third point, she says we use more animals than whatever. You basically just repeated the point. They've got a liberal use of animals. I said, well, they got a liberal use of animals at McDonald's too, but nobody's belly aching about that. Well, they are if they eat too much, but that's not really where the argument is. So you need to kind of take the opportunities that are given to you here for value claims and policy arguments, and she gave you the loopholes. You ought to follow through on them. All right, thank you. All right, Jerome, we're going to have you next, please.